And before we hop into the agenda, I also would like to see if people would join me in a moment of silence. The last few days, a week or so, we've seen tremendous events across the country, which I think have, at least I can only speak for myself, has caused me deep reflection, a lot of anxiety, and I know I'm not alone in that. And so I would appreciate if you would all join me in a moment of silence to honor the memories of Black lives lost, and to reflect on those who have suffered injustice because of being victims of racism, both here in our community, across New Hampshire, and across the United States. Thank you. So I am going to share our agenda. Just bear with me one sec. And so the first thing we'll do, I will reiterate, as we've been doing now for the past couple months, that this meeting is being held completely virtually. There is no physical location for this meeting, and that is because the governor has issued an emergency order which waives certain requirements of RSA 91A. That is the open meeting law here in New Hampshire. Because of the pandemic and because of the emergency order, public bodies like ours are able to conduct our businesses fully remotely, as long as we have the opportunity for the public to be able to tune in and to participate. And so this meeting is available for members of the public to both listen in on a phone line as well as to join us here using Zoom. We will have two public comment portions of the meeting, and so those who are joining us by Zoom, when we get to those, I will show, I'll tell you how that you can get our attention in order to provide public comment. But again, there is no physical location, but all the other requirements that we have as a public body, which includes minutes of the meeting, as well as we record this meeting, although that's not a requirement. We do record the meeting so people can watch them at their leisure. So the next item are any additions or deletions from the agenda. Steve? Oh, you're muted, Steve.
We're going to table the minutes for the May 19th, the public minutes of May 19th and May 21. Those were finished up and I just didn't get a chance to put them in the folder, but the non-public minutes are good to go. And there was since I mailed the packet, there was just a PDF about some bond numbers, and I have updated certificates and loan agreement if the board decides to go with a certain type of loan. Perfect.
And any correspondence?
There's quite a few correspondence. There's an email from a community member urging the board to be concerned about reducing the budget because of money that funds may need available to support interventions due to remote learning. There was a significant number of documents related to the solar project that I'll have them available at the next meeting as well. There was a letter regarding the potential additional cuts to the English position, a letter regarding the importance of the numeracy specialist position, an email about the use of title grants, and just a reminder, there's an all-district staff tomorrow at 1.
Great, thanks, Steve. And so we have next items are approval of minutes, and as Steve said, we will postpone a vote on the public meeting minutes from the 19th and the 21st. But we did have in our packet the non-public meeting minutes, and so I would ask if there is a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve the minutes of the May 19th non-public session of the Hopkinton School Board.
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Great, and so we will do a roll call vote, and so I'll start with Andrea.
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm?
Norm Gupel, yes.
Seth?
Seth A. Frame, yes.
And Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is yes, and so those minutes are approved 5-0. So this brings us to our first public comment portion of the meeting, and so if there's any attendees who wish to provide public comment at this point, what I'd ask you to do is move your cursor down towards the bottom of your screen, and there's a raise your hand button. you click that, that will let me know that you wish to provide comment, and I can bring you over bring you over to our side of the Zoom table, and you can unmute yourself and provide your comment. And so if there's anybody who wishes to provide comment now, there will be another chance later on at the end of the meeting. All right, I'm not seeing anybody. I always say that and someone raises their hand. All right, so we will move we'll move off of public comment, and again, this option, we'll have another one later on in the meeting. And so we are going to be going now to comments from the Hopkinton School Board. And so I will start with, Rob, you're first on my screen.
I will be brief. So first, I'm flying solo with a puppy tonight. So if you see me disappear, it's probably because I went and did something with the puppy who's controlling my universe.
Good luck.
Yes. 2, congratulations to everybody for wrapping up the year and, all of that, what has gone on for the last 2 or 3 months. I'm sure everybody's relieved to be done. In regard to Saturday and the vote, there'd be a lot to be said, but I will leave it to, it was definitely instructive for me. And lastly, I think, we as a board talked about trying to get consensus as a board as we make decisions. And when I think about Saturday, our job is to get consensus with folks who live in town as well. So yeah, those are my comments for tonight.
Thanks, Rob. Seth?
So I'll just reiterate what Rob said there at the end. Obviously, I was very disappointed with the outcome on Saturday. And the lesson for me is, I know that we acted in more than good faith and attempted to find a solution that we thought met all needs. And apparently we didn't, which means we don't understand fully all that's going on. We have to make efforts to try to understand better why what we proposed was not acceptable. And we also have to do a better job in including people outside of our group about what the cuts mean. And because what I've learned in my very short time on the school board is we are playing with fire here in our school system, and it is the crown jewel of Hopkinton, and we have to protect it. And that means we have to communicate to come to consensus, because it's not just community, and the community has to want the schools to succeed. And our job as a school board is to advocate that and communicate that and listen to people so that everyone can understand. And hopefully when we do this again, we're in a position where everyone is pulling in the same direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. Norm?
Love your fire, Seth. Jim, I want to say thank you for the moment of silence to begin the meeting. I think that was very appropriate with what's going on in our times right now. Thank you for that. I just want to say thank you to everyone that came out and voted, and especially the volunteers. I went through there on a run, and it was smooth sailing, and a lot of people in town really made it successful. This town spoke, and I think it's great that we had a lot of people go out and vote, and this board has to look at the big picture and put our heads together. So I really want to say thank you to the town of Hopkinton for coming out to vote. I just want to say thank you to Steve and his leadership, and our teachers, our bus drivers, our custodians, and everyone for a successful school year. It was rough, it was hard, and it takes a team from top to bottom to educate our students. And I just really, as a parent, as a school board member, I really, really want to say thank you. It was rough for me at the beginning with distance learning with my children, but I had so much support from the teachers. I almost had Steve teach my kid mixed numbers at one point because we kept on talking, but we got through it. The last thing I want to say is thank you to Amy and Bill for Move Up Day. The energy from my child that day was just amazing. My daughter Autumn kept pressing on a link to talk to Joan Fonsby on Zoom, and I said, Autumn, it's not till tomorrow. But she was so excited to have that interaction with her new teacher for next year that I enjoyed precious moments like that with them. And I just wanted to say thank you to Bill and Amy for orchestrating that still with the students, because Move Up Day is an important event for these students. And for that energy to still be there for me as a parent and from many other parents, I think was a great thing considering what we're going through. Thank you.
Thanks, Norm. Andrea.
Sure. So a lot has been said already. I just really wanted to focus on the teachers. I think that the teachers in town are a huge part of our community, whether they have their home where they sleep in Hopkinton. They spend the majority of their time in our town, in our community, going to our shops and working with our children. And I just want to not just thank them, but really recognize them for going above and beyond, for putting our children first, for being dynamic and willing to change, and also sticking with us through an incredibly difficult time where I know a lot of them don't feel seen and don't feel appreciated. And so I'm really speaking to them right now, where I do see you. I do feel how difficult this has been. And I do hope you know that you do have a board that is behind you and that is doing our best to support you as community members, along with the rest of our community who may or may not have children in our school, be currently in our school, or just passing through. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Andrea. And I'll be very brief. And I think we've started off many board meetings where I've said something similar, which is we have a lot of work to do. I was hoping for a different outcome. I think we were all hoping for a different outcome on Saturday. But that wasn't the outcome. Of what we were hoping for didn't come to pass. And so our work continues to find that consensus that I think Seth spoke about, or Rob, I'm sorry, spoke about, between what we need to have in order to move our school district forward and what the community can support. And we didn't find it this last time, but we got to keep working at it. And so we have tonight, we'll have a pretty good discussion on what some of those choices are in front of us, and try to plow a path ahead that continues to have Hopkinton be an educational leader, and provide, I think, the quality education that we want to provide and that we're known to provide, and be, I think, a bit more realistic about where the community is and their ability to afford it, and try to find a way to match those two as best we can, because we're going to be coming back together right now in August, in order to present a path forward. And I think the time between now and August is good. It gives us, our last go around, I think we did that in 4 or 5 days, put a plan together. We have more time, which is good, and the community has more time to absorb, what our conversations are going to be and some of the choices that we have. And to Seth's, I think, it gives us an opportunity to explain what the consequences of some of these choices are. So, so I don't know that I feel good, although I think I think we're in the best position as being a new board that we can be in order to sort of move this conversation forward. So looking forward to continuing our work on this budget, and then soon thereafter a new budget for the next fiscal year. Well, thank you. Our next item is going to be presentations and staff reports. And so if you bear with me one sec, I'm going to bring Rebecca over. There we go. All right. Hi, Becky. Thanks for joining us.
Guys, how are you?
Doing well.
Get promoted. It feels so, really exciting.
Feels so good, right?
Yeah.
So, Steve, I don't know if you want to do any setup or just hand it over to Becky.
I'll just very briefly. So we had administrator reports, I think, at the last meeting. Becky had a hall pass from me. It's up to her if she wants to talk about the reason why. But this is, sadly for me, this is probably the last time that Becky will have at least this opportunity to address the board, as she's going off to other pastures. So I think it's really nice that Becky will be the only report tonight. And publicly, Becky, thank you. I've learned so much. I've enjoyed laughs. I've enjoyed working through issues and problems, but learning from you. And thanks for being here tonight. And I turn it over to you.
Well, thanks. I'm happy to be here. It is sort of a little bittersweet moment. I don't know how it feels to be the only one giving a report on the agenda. I was getting married at the last board meeting at the time that you guys were meeting. So thanks for the hall pass. Greatly appreciated. This is kind of a strange opportunity for me to give my board report. I love talking to the board. This is my, last formal meeting sort of with Jim and Norm, but for Andrea, Rob, and Seth, this is kind of my first board report. So it's sort of a strange dichotomy in that way, but it's a strange time. So I guess, if that's how it's going to be, it's a good time to practice that. Usually we do sort of, 3 things that we've been working on, 3 things that have been keeping us up at night. I guess one of the gifts of ending the school year a little bit early this year has been that I've been able to prioritize a little bit of time for reflection. This is the end of my 21st year as a building or district level student services director. So I'm sure there'll be a lot more reflection that I'm happy to share maybe towards the end of this month once things are sort of wrapped up, if that's something the board's interested in terms of sort of systemic thoughts overall. But I'll leave that up to you guys if that's useful to you. But in terms of sort of following the usual board report format, I'll do that tonight. And I'm open to questions if that comes up, since usually I provide these ahead of time in writing. But this change, there's been a lot of change in special ed over the time that I've been in special ed as a director. Inclusionary practices have changed, social emotional supports and things like that have changed, but this switch to remote learning is probably the most substantial change in all of education, quite honestly, with the least amount of turnaround time in my time, at least in this position. And I think, that has given some opportunities for a lot of different reflections by lots of people. So I think, my only advice, I guess, in that way moving forward is to think about, and I think Jim just alluded to it, taking now we have a little bit of a gift of time to think about what we are returning to. I'm not sure any of us really know that. And so a lot of the work, at least from student services, has been working on creating some plans for students that are flexible and adaptable while remaining really highly individualized, which is a little tricky given the fact that we don't know what returning looks like. And I think we don't know what that looks like for any of the kids. So trying to be mindful from a student services perspective about, as Jim said, not only this current budget that we're trying to project out on, but in October, thinking about the budget for the year to come. The turnaround time on some of those things is something that's been heavy on my mind. So trying to think about creating plans that are flexible, but also financially sort of mindful. I don't want to say responsible. I think everyone is responsible in that situation, but to be fiscally mindful of what would cause certain decisions to go a certain way is really important. One of the other pieces that has been happening and that I've been really mindful and evident to everyone has been sort of the value of the relationships that your student services staff have with the families of the students that they serve. All of the students come with their own sort of sets of needs. Some of the populations of students that your student services staff have to work with require a completely different way of thinking. And I think the relationships that the staff have with those families have been really highly evident and have been instrumental during this remote learning time to allow people to move forward and make progress, or to have conversations about things that maybe haven't gone to plan, and to be really thoughtful about that. But to have those conversations in a really collaborative way has been really evident. And I just, it's not something that you see everywhere. So I'm really thankful for that. The instructional assistants have, for the most part, all of them completed some online professional development on increasing student independence and how their roles can support that. That's been a really big priority across the board over time. but it was a nice opportunity for them to think about the students they work with now in different environments and how can they continue to support them while also promoting independence. In terms of things to come, my soon-to-be replacement, Mandy, and I have met 3 times. We met this week actually face-to-face, socially distanced for the first time for about 2 hours. So that was really nice. You guys are going to love her. She's great. I think we've talked a lot about how to estimate the needs of students moving forward and what that could mean, both from a service delivery model perspective, but also from a fiscal perspective, what the moving parts of that are, and how to create systems that are going to be able to adapt over time. I think all of us in the field have talked about it's unrealistic to think that we'll ever go back probably to exactly the way that it was before. With all the crisis planning and emergency planning that we've all been part of for many years, we never tabletopped this particular issue or this situation. So I think we'll never kind of go back to that, not knowing that piece of it. So we're spending a lot of time talking about how to estimate those needs, how to assess all students, and then what does that mean for students who require additional support? What are the additional assessments that we might need to be thinking about for those students in terms of additional services kids may need to sort of overcome some of the barriers that this might have created. But I guess, in closing, I just really am grateful to the board that you've come to me with your questions and that you've been so valued my input over the last few years. And I certainly realize the responsibility that you actually just take on as a board member. You're not made to be put in this position. It's something that you choose, and to try to think about that balanced governance position being a choice is just a really difficult one to put yourselves in. And I appreciate that very much. So I'm hopeful that I get to work with you in the future in my new role at the School Boards Association. So it's not really an ending, but it's certainly a shift for me. So I'm open to any questions that anybody might have.
Becky, thank you so much for that report and congratulations. How exciting. And well, on both, congratulations on the marriage and congratulations on your new job. We are sad to be losing you, but happy and proud that you're going to be still serving school boards and using your skills across the state for the betterment of students in the district. So thank you so much. So we have some questions for you. So Norm.
Becky, I just want to say congratulations on your marriage. It's great to hear, and I'm sad to see you go, but I just wanted to say thank you for the amount of care you put into your work for this district. Getting to work with you over the last year has been a great experience, learning from you and really understanding how, the needs of our students, where we need to improve, where we could look at many different ways. And I just want to say your work ethic is amazing. A lot of people have said they just enjoyed working with you, and I wish you nothing but the great success moving forward, and I hope we get to see you again. So thank you for everything you've done for this district, and I hope to see you around. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Norm.
Thanks, Norm. Andrea?
Well, it's fun seeing you on this side. I usually am in the audience and we'll see you in passing. So yes, congratulations, definitely. I think I'm excited to see what you do as well. I also had some questions. So I know that you were talking about estimating the needs of not only students who currently have been identified as needing an IEP or a 504, but students kind of in the general community. And I'm just wondering how that process is going and if that is information that we will have access to sooner rather than later, because I think that will be really instrumental in planning.
Yeah, I think, the leadership team moving forward, and some of this may be done after my departure, but I think a big push across the entire state is talking about, how do we assess where kids were when we left in March, all students, and where they are when we return to whatever that's going to look like, to assess sort of overall what was the impact on students during this time. No different than individual cohorts of kids. I think there's some districts where kids will maybe not have so to speak, lost ground because of the way that the shift was made. There may be some groups of students where that's been more challenging. There might be some geographic issues with that across the state. So, you know, as a directors group, we've been talking a lot about, you know, special ed is about access to regular ed, and where is regular ed in this picture when we get to that point. You know, I think it's anticipated that to some extent, obviously, this has had an impact on everyone, and trying to figure out how to assess that impact academically and otherwise is really, you know, the task of the entire school district. And then special ed and 504 and those other groups, ELL, some of those other needs are going to have to sort of base what other needs are there in addition to what has affected the entire population, and how do we adjust as a system overall. But again, to try to keep that overlay that special ed is about access to regular ed. So we need to keep looking at what does regular ed look like at this point, and how does special ed feed into that? How, you know, how do we address some of those things? And I think trying to look at our own system and how to assess sort of where we are flexible and being able to look at those things is going to be really important moving forward.
And I guess, like if you had any specific systemic changes, not like on the spot right now, but I would love to hear those. Another thing that I was really wondering about is I know that a lot of our IAs work one-on-one with students, but I was wondering if you could speak to the importance or value of IAs to greater classrooms.
So it's interesting. Different districts take different approaches to IAs. And I think, you know, across, you know, not just even in New Hampshire, the role of the IA has been a focus for many states for many, many years, and sort of what is the role of an IA. And what's important, I think, when you think about it in terms of special education or student access, is there's obviously students who require more intensive support for things like safety, potentially things like on-the-spot behavior modification, access to modifications to classroom curriculum that can't be made any other way than on the spot, some of those kinds of things. That's what you're looking at when you're thinking about special education, for example, IAs. You can't predict every single thing that a student may need, and there's some students who need on-the-spot support and intervention that has to be provided by a person and can't be replicated by some other technology or pre-planning. You know, but I've talked a lot in Hopkinton and in other districts about being really clear with your budget and also with your conversations about the roles of some other IAs that might be in your district. You know, I use the example often of preschool or kindergarten. When you have 20 kids trying to put their snow pants on for a 15-minute recess, you might need an extra set of hands. And that's not because somebody has a disability, it's because you have 24-year-olds trying to put on snow pants. By the time you get them on, the recess will be over if there's just one person, right? So trying to be really clear about the roles of different support personnel in your buildings is really important. It's not that they're not needed, but they're not always all special ed. Sometimes they are. And sometimes if you have a person that's assigned to a particular student for a reason, that doesn't mean if someone needs help with their snow pants, they're not going to help them, but that's not their primary role. So trying to sort of use your budget to tell the story of what are the needs of the building and what are the needs of individual students is really important. You know, and the other piece that's a constant sort of conversation across the field is thinking about, we have pretty clear criteria about why we would assign a particular IA to a student. We need to continue to do a really good job at talking about what would it look like for the IA support to be faded. What are the behaviors or what are the competencies a student would show that would allow us to fade that support? It can't be just always assigned and then that, you know, I don't want to call it a life sentence because that sounds really negative, but it's not for the rest of time. You know, the idea is that the person is there to help build those independent skills, and that when those skills become more independent, then you can fade that support, or the support might stay, but it might look very different. And I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding that if the person's role never seems to change on paper, that means it's not changing in the classroom. And that's not really true either. Sometimes the hours may stay the same, but the role of that person may shift depending on the needs of the student. We expect a lot different things from a 9th grader than we do from a 6th grader. They may need 6 hours of support when they're a 6th grader, and they may need 6 hours of support when they're a 9th grader, but what that support looks like might be very different. And that's where it gets challenging in a small town to not get into the weeds that would be really, you know, an invasion of people's privacy. So those are my quick words of wisdom about IA positions. Tell your story well, put things in the right line, and talk about, the changing role of some of those people.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I have another question, but Seth can go because I'm taking up all the time.
It's all right.
All right, Seth, and we'll come back to Andrea.
So I think it's important as we continue this budget discussion to make sure we're getting on the table what cuts mean. One of the more troubling things I heard during the last budget debate, I think at the budget committee meeting, but I'm not sure, was that, special ed is raised as when you want to protect the schools, the school committee pulls out special ed and waves it around. And what I want to hear from you, I'm sure you are familiar with the cuts that were proposed, the position at Maple Street. There was discussion of reducing IAs. Can you talk about how would that change the model of delivery, and what do you think the outcomes would be if we made those cuts?
I can give you some general overviews. I think a couple of things when that sort of comes to light. What districts can choose any type of service model that they want to implement the laws that they're required to implement as special ed or 504, any of those specialty areas. One of the things that's drastically different across districts is inclusionary practices and sort of interpretation of what's your hard obligation versus what is it that you like to provide in terms of your school culture. And I think that, for all the cuts that are on the table, that's sort of where I think this sort of rubber will hit the road in terms of what will happen. Can you make cuts to special ed to reach a certain number? Yes. What will happen is it will change the service delivery models in the buildings that you have now. And people will have to start to trend solely towards providing just what is sort of the bare minimum needed to meet their obligation legally. That's very different than sort of what you have now. I will tell you that at least in the 3 years that I've been looking at the budget, this is the first year in Hopkinton that the special ed is not a driver of your budget. That was not a driver of your increases this year. So to cut from that area when there's been cuts previously, I think, is just a conversation to be had if you're looking at budget drivers. There have been other times where special ed clearly is the driver across many districts of budget increases. That's not true this year for you guys. Buildings will have to look at their service delivery models as a whole if we reduce positions, because we have to look at what are our legal obligations first, how would we meet those, and then what other interventions are we currently providing that perhaps wouldn't be able to be provided, or certainly wouldn't be able to be provided in the same way. It will change some of your inclusionary practices for sure.
And how long have you been in your position as the director?
Here?
Yeah.
I'm finishing my 2nd year.
Okay. And have we ever, in the time you've been familiar with Hopkinton, have we ever been a bare bones district when it comes to what we offer?
I don't think you're a bare bones district in any category, to be perfectly honest. And I think that that's been sort of a badge of honor that people have really promoted. Again, I think everything comes with a cost. I've been part of many of these meetings and many of the conversations outside of this meeting. I don't think that anybody likes the outcomes that come with cutting financial resources in any district. But here in particular, I think you have to be mindful of, what's important for the community to promote in terms of your education system. What is it that you want to hang on to, once you get past all of your legal obligations? And I think, it's a difficult situation. I think everybody has been sort of thrust into this situation right now of mistrust just by the pandemic and some other things. I don't think it's necessarily indicative of just the school district as a whole, but it certainly, has put people in a position of feeling really tenuous and uncomfortable. And, how to move forward together in that collaboratively, I think is going to be the hard work that you have between now and August.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Seth. Back to Andrea.
Tell me. So I've heard you talk a bit about inclusionary practices, and I'm wondering if you could let us know why they're important.
It's such a I mean, that's a difficult, quick answer.
It can be long.
Well, I've talked a lot already. I mean, I think that, you know, inclusionary practices, but I'll speak specifically to Hopkinton. I think that we are a district that has very few state-approved special ed programs within our district, which are typically more pull-out, resource room, self-contained type programs. We don't have many of those in our district. There's a reason for that, and I think the reason is that people really feel strongly as a community that all your students are included in the general ed program to the maximum extent that is appropriate for each student. And for Hopkinton, that's a very high percentage of your students and for a very high percentage of their day. With that, though, comes, again, to kind of go back to this idea of you have students who in some districts potentially would be set into a self-contained program where maybe they wouldn't need the level of support with staffing, but they wouldn't have access to all of the things that you give access to your students. Because we give them so much access to general ed, because that is you know, proven research-wise to be the most effective in terms of, on the other side of it, you know, when Rob's at the high school level, when kids come out on the other side, you know, we're expecting them to be able to be high-functioning, independent to the maximum extent they can, community members. You know, students who don't have access to that don't necessarily need maybe a one-to-one all day long, but they also don't necessarily turn out on the other side of things with the level of competence that our students do. So I think, you know, by restricting your inclusionary practices, one is you could get into some violations in terms of looking at least restrictive environment for students, which is the law. But secondly, you've created a culture where everybody is in all the classes all the time. For the most part, I'm speaking very broadly. There are obviously individual situations where that's not the case, but you know, for the most part, kids are included in what every kid is included in, and that's a real hallmark of what you know, the community that is built. So I think to restrict that is going to have to be to really verbalize what you're willing to let go of in terms of some of those kinds of things.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
Any other questions or thoughts?
I just want to jump in, Becky, on the last thing that you said about the inclusionary piece and kids in the regular classroom is, you know, your thoughts. My experience was often it was beneficial to both sides. You know, the classroom is enhanced when we have everybody there and people are getting to understand various needs. So it's not just a benefit to that special needs students. I mean, I feel like it's a benefit to everybody.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that very much.
And congratulations.
So Becky, this is if you had a crystal ball, and one of the things that I worry about, you know, fall comes and we don't go back to school, or it's limited in some way. And so from your experience, and you know, this first go about distance learning was, you know, we were thrust into it. It wasn't something planned, and so I'm sure you and your team learned a lot as you sort of navigated your way through. But I'm just thinking, if we don't come back in the fall, what do you think we should be thinking about as a board in terms of either investments or maybe savings, or just how do you think we're best prepared to meet the needs of the student population? What do we need to be thinking about to ensure that we have those resources available if we're not in school in the fall and we kind of continue on this trajectory, you know, through the school year?
You know, one thing, and Steve and I talked a little bit about this today, was trying to project, you know, maybe some additional types of services or beefed up numbers of a particular service like speech and language, some things like that. I think, you know, at this point, if we were to stay fully remote, I think that's one scenario that we could certainly, you know, manage and predict sort of how that's going to go, since that's what we've had now for the last several months. The piece that I find myself thinking about much more is this sort of variable either alternate schedule where kids are in school sometimes and home sometimes on a planned basis, or sort of this fade in and out of remote learning where we are in the building and then something were to happen and now we're going to be remote for a certain amount of time and then we're going to be back in the building, sort of back and forth. That I think presents a more challenging landscape for special education to some extent, because it's easier to set up a system that's going to run one way, right? We took our in-district in-person program and translated it fully to a remote, right? So it's one or the other. This sort of hybrid approach, I think, is going to take a mindset where people are able to be really flexible in terms of how their roles look. I think services are going to have sort of almost, two plans. This is what it looks like in person. This is what it looks like remotely. This is the translation. I think in terms of making sort of individualized education plans, we've always written them for kids who are in this building, for example, 6 hours a day. We currently have remote learning plans for those students. It's not this, special ed as an umbrella. We're not at a place where we've gotten good at writing sort of 2 IEPs almost for students moving forward. But I think that is something to think about, having some remote learning plan that is attached almost to students' IEPs, that if we were to go back to remote learning or, under the circumstance where maybe a student actually is ill moving forward and has to be home remotely, I think there's a lot of pieces to that is going to take a little bit more planning. I think as a board, thinking about having resources where people understand, that it could look different ways. This is the resource, but here are the different sort of approaches in which that could look. Working with families on, certainly our work days are the same in some ways, but very different in other ways, that's no different for schooling, and trying to figure out how to translate support in different environments for students is going to be really important. So I predict that, I said to Steve today, one area I've been thinking about a lot are kids who have difficulty with transitions for whatever reason. If we go to a hybrid model where sometimes they're here and sometimes they're home, I envision some of those transition type service supports needing to get beefed up, or maybe for students who typically haven't had that problem. I think we have, as a community as a whole, looked quite a bit at anxiety across the board before this ever happened, and I'm not really hard and fast clear on how this current change might affect some of those situations. Some of our social emotional supports that we needed before for other reasons, I think we still need maybe now at a different level for different reasons. And those are not, some of the academic concerns that I think, could come out of this. But again, I think it's looking at, as a district as a whole for the board, what are supports all kids might need access to right now when we return that maybe they didn't need before? What are some support staff might need, with this back and forth? And how do we then infuse, what's over and above for those students who might need something different?
Rob?
Answer, sorry.
Yeah, Becky, this is it's reading about, I don't know if it came from the governor or the DOE, but the plan for the fall to have all students have a meeting and perhaps 2 meetings.
Yep.
Seems like a rather large endeavor, and knowing what I know about meetings, maybe not particularly realistic. Can you give us a sort of sense as to where that's at and the challenges we might have there?
Sure. So the governor's order that came out about holding several meetings, one was for students to revisit any students who might not have qualified for extended school year before June 30th this year, to revisit that if that were a concern. We've been really fortunate. I will say, I work closely with many other districts in the state, districts like Nashua, Manchester. Yes, this is a big time commitment for us, but for some of those districts, this is really, and many of them are already out. So they're calling teachers back for some of these things. So I will tell you that when we went to remote learning, we had meetings on almost all of our students, not every single one, but a very high number. So we're in very good shape for the first part of that order in terms of students who maybe needed some additional supports this summer that initially they might not have qualified for. So we feel very confident on that piece. We have looked at hiring some special ed teachers as team leaders this summer. Normally we don't have that particular role. We have building team leaders to run summer programming, but we've added a couple specifically to make sure that we have staffing available to have some of these meetings over the summer if we need to. We've been directed by the commissioner and the director of bureau support that some of those meetings that they're requiring be held within the first 30 days of school starting in the fall can start now. So there's some students that we've already talked about having those meetings maybe over the summer to sort of lessen that amount. And again, this kind of speaks to this idea of having kind of a flexible mindset about what fall is going to look like. If special ed case managers need to have an IEP team meeting for every student on their caseload, again, our caseloads are not small, but they're not crazy. You know, we don't have 45 kids. That service providers may have to look at fall as a time for assessment, a time for revisiting IEP plans for that first 30 days to really get a handle on what students might need, and then look at the service provision time being more of an October to June and you know, increasing time maybe for a shortened duration. You know, it's very common that the first 2 weeks of school are used to set schedules for service provision on a typical year. It may be this year that we have 4 weeks of that, and some of that is assessment for all students, assessment for special ed, having the meetings to talk about what their service plans need to look like for the remainder of the year. So I think Mandy and I have talked extensively about sort of how to organize that. Again, some of that will hinge on what regular ed's assessment schedule and things like that look like, and trying to make sure that we have the legally constituted teams at those meetings. I don't think it's unreasonable as long as everyone's mindset is a little flexible on how that first 30 days of school can look.
Norm, I saw you put your hand up. I don't know, you're all set? Any other questions? Well, Becky, thank you so much for joining us. This was really insightful and helpful, so thank you. Congratulations again, and we're going to miss you. But congratulations and good luck, and hope we see you again soon.
I'm looking forward to working with you guys. Take care. Thanks so much.
Bye. All right, so we're going to go back to our agenda. And so next up is items for board discussion. And shockingly, our first item for board discussion is a debrief on the annual meeting. And so Steve, I don't know if I'm going to hand it over to you maybe to start this, and then we haven't quite talked about how we want to move through this, but maybe I don't want to put you on the spot either.
No, it's fine.
Perfect.
Sure. So this item just gave an opportunity to talk about the process. You know, you guys addressed it in your board comment, a little bit about the implications. And then the second one, and we can cover them both together, is now that we don't have a budget, or we continue not to have a budget, we'll be operating under Executive Order 38, which gives authority to school districts to operate with a funding level in relation to last year's spending. And based on Jim's request, I did get a chance to talk with our attorney about that, and our attorney's interpretation, or believes the best way to defend this is he interpreted it as last year, apostrophe S, which is singular. So a flat budget, implementing a budget based on last year's expenditures, is the most defensible approach that the board can take if there ever is a test to the decision making and the decision to fund at what level. So these are a two-part really piece, just to follow up on any other comments about the process, and then start thinking about, as we move forward through continued hiring, because we have not hired staff, and there is, and it's down under personnel, but the implications are, the first set is there's a statutory requirement to provide contracts or notices of employment, either yes or no, by the last day of school for educational support personnel. And so the funding, this is all connected. Once you determine a funding level that you're comfortable with going until August 12th, then you staff appropriately or issue contracts appropriately, which binds the district to a funding level for those individuals. And so in June, that's the nearest deadline. And then the other two slates are non-union support and Teamsters. And as we talked about earlier, if it's necessary to address those in June, because once July 1 hits, it's a different calendar for our health insurance and things like that. So we have this meeting the 4th and then the 18th to come to closure on funding, on staffing, as we move into the next fiscal year, operating under what our attorney says is a flat budget. Does that help? Context, to put this in context?
No, I think it does. And just so I think at this point we're aware. So the flat budget amount would be if we took what we proposed, at least in terms of reductions that we've already put on the table, of $350,000, give or take. This would be an additional 500 and
about 18.
Okay, so 518-ish that
Right.
we would have to find to reduce.
Right, and just putting it in context, if we just find, so it'd be $1.1 million reduction from my proposed budget, an $850,000 reduction from the first budget committee approved budget, and then about a 520 or so thousand reduction from this board's and this budget committee's supported budget that went to the town on the 30th.
But we have to, I mean, so right now we don't have a budget and we're going to be entering a new fiscal year. And so the governor's emergency order allows us to continue moving forward with I don't want to call it a default budget because that's not really what it is, but it is an ability to make expenditures based upon last year's amount. And then what I heard you say, I just want to make sure it's clear. So we have that dollar amount, and we also have some dates in which we have to issue contracts or say if we're going to employ. And so that our last day of school is technically what, Monday?
Monday, Tuesday, Monday for elementary, Tuesday for secondary. So for our 60 or so support staff, a notice is required by, let's say, Monday, just to make it consistent. And so that means a notice, and the statute says the superintendent must notify. So it is a correspondence from me that Michelle and I and her staff have talked about putting something in the mail, end of business tomorrow, go out Saturday. I feel comfortable it would arrive at most people Monday, Tuesday. And I have communicated with Ann and Nancy, Ann Caller, Nancy Skarmas, who's the head of the support staff union. And they understand.
So if we don't, I mean, I don't think, well, and this is maybe a question for the board. I mean, I don't know that we have a plan in place at all in order to make the reductions of $500,000 plus. To know what those are and to get consensus from this group on what those would be. And so weighing that, I guess, that reality with the reality that we do have a number of support staff who are relying on having a contract and having a place of employment here. How to weigh those two things with sort of a deadline of tomorrow to send a letter out notifying people what to expect. And so a letter that if we don't have those answers, a letter that would go out would I assume, Steve, it would be that we don't have that answer, and that we hope to get it by the end of this month. Because if we don't have an answer, again, I'm sort of testing this to make sure I understand it. If we don't make a decision by the end of the month on which contracts to move forward, then they no longer are eligible for health insurance. Is that correct?
Correct. So what has to happen by Monday or Tuesday is a notice that either they have a contract or they do not. That has to be done, and by statute. And so if that continues, that we haven't secured or offered contracts to people, anyone by July 1 who does not have an employment contract with the district would be ineligible for any benefits because they are not employed.
And so maybe this is sort of a first question among many that I think we'll have to work through. I mean, that was my advice. That's not the right way to say it. I'm not sure that we could send a letter tomorrow signifying that we were gonna have contracts for all of our support staff at this point. And so I guess that's maybe a first test. And Rob, you raise your hand, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I'm under the impression that Steve has got some recommendations as to how to get to that 519,000 additional. Am I clear about that?
Yes, there is a scenario described that because it deals with personnel is in the non-public portion
Non-public, right?
of the meeting. But yes, there is certainly some thoughts about how to currently determine a funding level that is recommended by our attorney and live within those means from now until August 12th.
So perhaps, and I don't know about the timing of this, Jim, but maybe we should go into non-public earlier so we can have those discussions, or we can have that discussion later tonight. But it seems like once we've had that, then perhaps we do have the knowledge that we need to move forward to issue contracts to folks that we feel should be coming back to support our students.
And we can go into non-public on that matter anytime. If we can finish up this discussion, answer questions about where we are, go into non-public, and then go and then come back to our regular business.
I don't know if it's, I mean, it's up to you, but I don't know if it's necessary to do it in that manner or just to do it later. But
well, yeah, it feels
public comment that we want to hear. So
it feels for the flow of the meeting that we might want to get through this and then do our non-public, because we have a couple non-publics I think scheduled on issues to talk about. And then the challenge will be, I think those who are attendees at the meeting tonight may want to know where we're going with some of this, and it may be a challenge because we may be in non-public for a while, but that might be the limitations of sort of our ability here and how we're doing Zoom meetings. Norm. Oh, go ahead. Andrea, if it's on this point.
My hand, I just jumped right in. I was just going to say that, you know, if we were live and in person and we all had to go to the back room for non-public, I mean, if we were live and in person right now, we would all leave the room and folks would just be sitting around waiting. So now they get to sit at home and wait. I mean,
yeah, and our only challenge is technical. And I guess Steve could hold this line and we could go and do that.
I agree with Andrea and Rob. It's going to be a lot easier for us to have this discussion because there's a lot of things I want to bounce off what Steve proposed that can only be handled in non-public.
So would the board like to go into non-public now? And we'll just have to technically figure it out, but we will be away from this meeting, I'm assuming, for at least a half an hour.
I would move that we go to non-public now.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right, so so there was a motion made to go into non-public under RSA 91A, and then this would be under A for personnel matters. And Andrea seconded it. And so let's see, it's a roll call vote. And so Seth?
Seth A. Frame, yes.
Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
Norm?
Norm Gupel, yes.
And then Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
And so Jim O'Brien is a yes. So I'm looking at Steve a little bit to figure out how best for us to go into non-public. I can send out an additional link to Zoom, but I don't know, Steve, you have to keep this Zoom up. The rest of us can leave.
I'll just mute and stop video on this side, and then I'll join the other one. As long as it's not on the district account, we can do that.
Okay, so you have another account on which you're able to, another computer on which you're able to join a second Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to stop recording.
I'll leave this meeting though, correct?
Yeah, so here's what I think we'll do. So I am going to send you all on your SAU account in a couple of minutes, another Zoom link that we can use for our non-public. So everybody will leave this meeting except for Steve, who will keep this meeting active so we can all come back to it when we conclude our non-public meeting. And so what I will do is, I'm going to say it's 6:35. We will reconvene in non-public with the link that I'll send you. In just a minute. I just have to wait for my email to power up here on my end. So I'll send that to everybody in your SAU accounts. At 6:30, we'll reconvene in non-public. And then for attendees on this line, I would expect that we will be probably in non-public for, I'm going to say a half an hour. It's really hard to know how long we're going to be in for, but that's probably a realistic assumption that that conversation will take us that long. And then we'll come back here into this meeting and continue our public portion, which will include discussion on the budget and then the other matters that have put on the agenda. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, so for the board, I'll see you again in a few minutes in a different room. And then Steve, thank you much. who have hung on to the line, and Michelle for waiting patiently for us to return. I do appreciate it. I know it's not easy, so thank you. And so for the board, is there a motion to come out of non-public session?
I'll make
Move
that.
to come out of non-public.
I'll second.
Perfect. And so we have to do a roll call. So Rob,
Rob Nato, yes.
Andrea,
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm,
Norm Poopel, yes.
Seth,
Seth A. Frame, yes.
and Jim O'Brien is a yes. So we're out of non-public session. Is there a motion to seal the minutes from the non-public session?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the motion's been made to seal the minutes. Rob,
Rob Nato, yes.
Andrea,
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm,
Norm Poopel, yes.
Seth,
Seth A. Frame, yes.
and Jim O'Brien is a yes. The motion to seal the minutes passes. So again, thanks everyone. So the decision that we needed to make this evening pertaining to the budget levels, the governor's order, and how we proceed to move forward had to do with the HES contract and whether or not we make the decision this evening to extend contracts to all of our support employees. We have until the end of the month in order to extend contracts in order for employees to retain their health insurance. The board has had a lengthy discussion about what we should do, and the decision I think has been made by the board to at this point not extend contracts. And so we would ask Steve as a superintendent to send a letter to our HES employees, letting them know that we are not at this time able to extend contracts, and that the board will continue to work knowing the June 30th deadline, and we'll continue to work at our next meeting in order to continue working on our budget and expenditure amount for fiscal year 21 in order to sort of meet the statutory obligations that we have and the obligations under the governor's emergency order for our expenditure limit. Andrea.
I just wanted to speak to this decision because I think it's important that the public understand why we came to the decision we made. Because what this means is that on Monday, we're going to have about 60 employees receive pink slips, folks who have been with our district for years, if not decades. We did not, it took us an hour of active discussion to come to this decision. It was not an easy one. But the reason we came to the decision we did is because we heard what the town said on Saturday, that they're really wanting us to cut and go really deep. And what that means are this is what it means. This now means that RIA positions are on our list of things that we will look to as far as reductions. And it's not emotional, and it is not, we're not just going for the hard-hitting thing. This is the reality of what our board is facing. So when we're asked to be fiscally responsible with our money and make those difficult decisions, I want people to understand that this is part of making those difficult decisions. This means that 60 people will get pink slips. I don't want them to get pink slips. I don't think any of us want that. But that's the decision that we were basically forced to make this evening because we can't cut any more pencils. This is where we're at. So I really just wanted to speak and make that really clear to folks that this was not an easy decision. It's not something that any of us are happy about, but we also do feel that we want to make sure that folks see that we are listening to them and are willing to really look at all aspects. And so this is one of them. That's it.
Thank you, Andrea. Norm?
I agree with a lot of what Andrea said, but I just want people to know that this is our first board meeting since this weekend, and this board needs to be able to look at multiple different options within our budget to come to an agreement of what we want to do. You know, in my opinion, you know, this is my opinion alone, you know, the offer that we gave to the town, respectfully, is going to change. We have to decide as a board what is best in order to get to a specific number and determine how we can meet the needs of our students. There's tough choices we have to make, and we can't commit to a specific contract right now, but we do have the opportunity to look at other options and time where in this month we can still honor if we want to, and they can still have health insurance, which is important to me as a board member. But it's important that the community understands that these are going to be hard choices that we have to look at, and we don't want to be we understand where you're coming from. It's one of those things we just can't honor tonight.
Thank you, Norm. Anybody else want to share their thoughts on this decision? Rob?
So just to be clear, pink slips don't mean that 60 people are going to lose their jobs. Pink slips mean that over the course of the next 2+ weeks, positions will be evaluated, and we'll take a long, close look at whether or not it's educationally viable and financially viable to maintain all those positions. We hope so, but that's what it means, I think.
So Rob is right about that, but I think it's important that it's easy to say zero budget. And I sat through many hours of many people saying zero budget. And as Jim pointed out at the end of the budget committee meeting, while many people said zero budget, virtually, if not all people, came forward with no concrete suggestions. These are the concrete suggestions that get you to a zero budget. This is the beginning of that process. There'll be many other unpleasant decisions that we have to make. So we have to get beyond in our discussion, zero budget, reducing the cut, that's not a solution. That's a talking point. This is the beginning of the solution, which are deep and painful cuts. And so Rob's right. All these positions aren't going to be eliminated, but we have to take a broad look at all of them, because that's what we have to start thinking as a school board based on the instructions that we now have. And that is unfortunate.
Thank you, Seth. Yeah, I mean, I think to Rob's point and Seth's, I mean, in order to get, start July 1st with our expenditure limit that we have, we have to start putting out options. We got to know what all of our options are, both on reduction of dollars, and then also how do those reduction of dollars impact students and impact the programs that we give. And so to me, this is an unfortunate decision that we had to make, but it's really an unfortunate decision, so that as we're putting all the options on the table, we're not limiting those, and we can have a broader discussion about how all these expenditures impact the others, to get to a point by July 1 that we can operate with what is going to be an expenditure limit to what we can't spend beyond. And by issuing contracts today, we would be limiting all the decisions we can make in the future when we don't have all the information yet to make those decisions. So I feel like all of us, this doesn't feel good in many ways, but it feels like the next step to getting the information we need in order to start to make those longer and harder choices. We need to know what all of our options are. Rob, you raised your hand again.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not, but Steve did bring forward to us a list of items that got us to a number. And I would ask that we see a more expansive list of options, greater than that, so that we can have all of the opportunity to figure out what the opportunity costs of those things are. I think for us to make a meaningful decision, we can't just look at items that get us to that flat budget, but a broader list so we can actually make some choices between them. And hopefully that can happen. Thank you.
So our next meeting is the 18th. And so that's 2 weeks from tonight. And so my hope is that individually, if we have ideas, and additional options, that we should send those to Steve, as well as ask Steve to help create that list. And on the 18th, we'll have, I think what we'll have is a broader list of what's available, where we don't have contracts, because we have issued some contracts, and so those won't be on that list. But have a more robust discussion on the 18th. And again, our decision on the 18th is going to set us up for, how many HES contracts we're able to move forward with, as well as some additional reductions that we're going to want to contemplate as we start the new fiscal year. So I don't know if that was clear, but Rob, I with you, I hope that we see a broader list, and then we should ask Steve to help with that, and we should feel have the opportunity to send ideas that we might have to add on to that list. And I would just say, for members of the community, thoughts and ideas and solutions for how we get there would also be welcome. And so I think anybody can reach out to me with suggestions or ideas for where some of these might come from, and they can get put onto a broader list. Norm?
I just want to say real quickly, the ideas are definitely going to be helpful, but just to give you a scope between now and our next meeting, we do have a finance committee meeting next week. So I'm sure this will come into play in that discussion. So maybe when we have that meeting, we'll have a little more of a direction and answers that we're prepared for the next board meeting. So just to let you know, between now and then, there's a finance meeting. So maybe that will help a little bit.
No, that's great. Thank you for bringing that up. I think it should help a lot. So appreciate your work on that, and Rob's as well. And as you guys, ask questions of Steve and Michelle, that will help the process out a lot. At this point, are we okay to move to the next agenda item? Any more thoughts on the budget or sort of where we're at now that we want to bring up? I don't see any, and I don't see any hands. So I'm going to share just so we can reorient ourselves and for attendees where we're at. So we're going to move on to the building project. And I think I'm going to ask Norm and Steve and Rob to provide an update and then recommendations that the building committee has brought forward for a bond term, and then any other discussion around the building project.
Great, thanks, Jim. Real quick update about our meeting this past Tuesday. We received some bids on Maple, and we reviewed some more information regarding the layout and everything, which was really informative. We plan to get some more bids in later on this week from BPS, and he plans to provide with more information down the road. So we're gearing up to start with everything, but we're going to have more information from all our vendors and from BPS. But probably the most important thing that we discussed at the meeting was the bond. The school board charged the building committee to come up with a recommendation to this board regarding the bond. So Steve and I prepared a little brief discussion to present to the board and to the public on a couple of scenarios. And Steve, are you host right now?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, go ahead. Let's put that up, and I'll walk through it.
Can you see the slides?
Yeah, I can see the slides. That's perfect.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So this is a really quick slide. Just want to go through it real quick with everybody. So tonight, what we're going to talk about is the term rate, level debt, and level principal. What's important to understand is the difference between level debt and level principal. Level debt is the consistent same payment all through the years of 20 years. So, and then the interest depreciates. So for example, you have a principal payment of $6, interest is $4, the payment's $10. Next year, payment is $6.50, and then your interest is $3.50, your payment is $10. So the next option that we potentially could do is level principal payments, in which the principal remains the same through the whole term of the bond, and then your interest depreciates. So for example, you would have a principal payment from year 1 to year 20 of, let's say, $6 the first year, and then the interest would be $5, your payment would be $11. The following year, you'd have a principal payment again of $6, but your interest would be $4, but your total payment would be $10. So the difference between the two, just to be clear, is you do get more interest payments with level debt, and you have less interest payments with level principal payment. So that's important for the board to know. The next thing is we need to go back to the past and discuss what we presented to the community. So back at the bond hearing, we had said to the community that we are looking at a 20-year bond at level debt at a rate of 4%. So back then, when we had discussed with the community, the tax impact was $1.15 per 1,000 on the bond of 9.7. However, as you all know, we have a wonderful new tax evaluation with the town of Hopkinton. So ideally, that lowers the tax impact to 0.92. So I want to be transparent. So we went from a 1.15 impact to the new tax evaluation of 92 cents per 1,000. And the interest calculated in that was 4.65. So this board a couple weeks ago discussed doing a phased approach. So what we have here is a couple options. The building committee recommended doing 20 years. However, it's important for this board to have the discussion on which phase approach, which approach we want to do, principal payment, or we do debt. So in this right here, you guys can see the two types of loan scenarios that we could do: level principal 1 and 2, and then level debt 3 and 4. You can see by doing level debt that our tax impact is quite less. It's 80 cents per 1,000 with a weighted interest rate of 2.55%. The most important thing, if I'm calculating this correctly, is that the interest is much less than what we were proposed at the town meeting. I think a difference of $1.7 million, because at the town meeting it was a 4% that was quoted to the town. So the building committee left it to this board to decide. If you agree with the 20 years, that's great, but there should be a discussion on whether or not we do level principal and level debt. And I want to thank Steve and Michelle for helping me with these slides. And Jim, I think it'd be great to hear a little bit of your feedback, because it's my understanding that the town of Hopkinton did the fire station as level debt. And I won't weigh on what I prefer. I'll take questions, and then I'll join in the discussions with the board if you guys have any questions.
Thanks, Norm. I since you posed the question to me, I have to honestly say, I don't remember the conversation for the fire station and why we went with level debt over level principal. So I can guess, or at least come up with a surmise of why that decision was made. But I don't remember the context of the conversation when we had it.
Okay.
So I do apologize.
No, don't apologize. Yeah.
Questions for Norm on the presentation and on sort of the recommendation of the building committee for 20 years versus 15, and then we can get into a discussion on the principal versus debt. Any questions for Norm?
So this is the 20-year we're looking at here?
This is, I don't know, Norm, do you want to speak to why the recommendation from the committee was 20 years?
Yes. We felt it's too much on the taxpayers to do 15 years. You know, in my opinion, and some of the other people, you know, we have a lot that we need to provide for the schools, and to be handcuffed, in my opinion, trying to push this 15 years onto the taxpayers would be a lot. And after talking to Gordon and talking to Steve and talking to many other districts that are doing the same thing with their bonding program, there hasn't been a district from my recollection in our discussion that did 15 years. And I think it's important. I would love to save interest, but what we're going through right now with our budgeting process and what this town's looking for, I can't see us saying we want to get this done in 15 years and then not have the opportunity to grow the budget. You know, if we have to do something, you know, it gives us, it frees us as an opportunity to add other things to the district. You know, potentially a teacher's contract's going to come, repair and maintenance is going to come. That tax rate is what everyone looks at, the tax impact. So we just thought it was too much for the taxpayers.
Jay had also mentioned that the scope of the work will exceed the time period of the bond, even at a 20-year bond. So with that calculation in mind, if it was not, then you would probably not consider that, but he felt very confident that what we're doing will well exceed that 20-year period.
So before we move to the next piece of the, I guess, the conversation, which is going to be around the level principal of debt, is the board comfortable with the 20-year time frame for the bond? And it's really the decisions on this the first bond if we continue with the phased approach. But I didn't see any shaking of the head there. Okay, so I think we can say we're comfortable with sort of the 20-year time frame. So then it's really a question around, you know, the level principal or level debt, and we have sort of the numbers in front of us here. Is there any other, aside from sort of the dollars and cents here, is there any other reason? Is there anything else sort of in the decision-making matrix that we should be thinking of between the two that I might be missing?
And Norman and I have had the discussion about just the fairness during the duration of the bond. If you go with level principal, if you live here, if you're in the first 5 years, you pay more than someone who moves in the last 5 years. And so the leveling out seemed to be equitable, whether what portion of the bond that you're experiencing or benefiting from. And one of the things that we've talked about for a long time is just stabilizing the tax rate. And this allows an 80-cent tax rate to be relatively close to that throughout. We've spent a significant amount of time with tax rate stabilization funds honoring that request by the town to try and not do peaks and valleys. So the fairness or equitability throughout the life of the loan, as well as the stabilization of the tax rate, I think were predominant discussions as we developed the proposal in January of 19.
The rates that are shown here, are those rates provided to us from the bond bank for the two? Okay, they are. Okay.
Yeah, I did the weighted average because it's really not a 2.13 or a 3, so I did a weighted average to compare it to the 4%. So the 4% and down to the 2.55, and hopefully we'll be able to beat the 2.5 as a weighted average. But yes, those were more accurate, obviously, for the first bond, and the other one's a little bit projection. But those were from the bond bank. Excuse me.
Thank you. So thoughts from board members on or questions or thoughts on which of these two options, and these are action. So these are action items tonight, and just so we're clear on what we're voting on. We have a number of, I guess we have votes we need to take tonight in order to make it so that we can move forward with the bond bank. And so this is the decision that we have to make in order to kind of keep the process moving forward to be ready for the July bond sale. I probably didn't state that 100% accurately, but I know we have to take the vote in order to proceed. And so the technical terms of what we're voting on is a little.
You did great. So there's two documents that the board has to do. One is the certificate of vote and one is the loan agreement. And so both of those are action items, and later today, the documents were revised. I mean, there's other ways to do this, and there still is a little bit of time, but it helps us if the board is going to adopt a level debt 20 years, the documents have been adjusted to support that. And then we'll have to figure out a signing procedure because we need 4 copies signed by all the board, but we'll figure that out. But yes, the action item would enable us to certify the certificate of vote and the loan agreement.
Thank you.
No
That was much
problem.
clearer than what I was saying.
No problem.
Jim, I just want to, just for the public, because we've heard a lot of feedback about tax rate, but we've also heard a lot of feedback about saving the most on interest. And, you know, those two things are incongruous. You can't have both. So I think that if we want the lower tax rate, yes, it's going to cost us a little bit more in interest, and that's the reason to go that way. So for folks out there who are thinking or questioning why we would incur more interest, it is to save on that tax rate, and that is just something that is inevitable. And if we're ready for a motion, I would move that we adopt the level debt approach.
I mean, that would be my preference as well. I think the Steve's last point that he made is sticking with me around, you know, the fairness in not going through the peaks and valleys and having the consistent payment over time that can be banked on, that we understand, feels like the right approach. So I would agree with that sentiment. Yeah. Any differing opinions?
No, that sold me on a little what Steve said. You know, no matter when someone moves into Hopkinton, they're still paying from when the bond started on day one. You know, and someone doesn't feel like that they're not getting their piece of the pie. And I think it's a fair fixed amount throughout the 20 years. And you know, like I said, I would love to save interest too, but I don't want the board to be handcuffed. And that's something that really stuck with me a lot. But I agree with what Steve said was a turning point for me when we had a discussion about this. And, you know, I just want to say thank you to the board for continuing this project and really investing in it for this town, because I'm really looking forward to seeing it through.
All right. So is there any, these are action items. And so as long as we're comfortable now moving forward with the 20-year level debt, we can move on and we'll get them in the action items. And so, and just, if anybody has anything else they'd like to say, now would be the time. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next item. Perfect. Norm and Rob, Michelle and Steve, thank you so much for the work on the building committee and sort of bringing this recommendation to us and really thinking it through. And I know it's not easy, and there's a lot of numbers and bond runs that you've all been working with, especially Michelle. So really appreciate your work on this and helping us come to this decision. Steve, you are still the host, and so I was going to throw the agenda up, which is fine.
I'm going to send it back to you, I promise. Sorry about that. I had to share.
No, don't be sorry at all. So just so we know where we've been and where we're heading, here's the agenda again. So our next item is going to be, all your faces are in front of me. There we go. It's going to be policy, and the policy committee and Steve have been working on 4 policies to bring forward for discussion and review tonight. So I'm going to turn it maybe over to you first, Steve.
Sure. Happy to take the ball. So earlier, actually, I think it might have been right, Michelle, before we went into remote learning, we had a visit, we had an audit of our federal funds by a member of the Department of Education. They came and did a file review of our expenditures, and they found, and which is not unusual, the gaps in policy. We did have lots of policy, but there was 4 policies that they recommended either some revisions or additions to. So this would finalize our corrective actions from our state DOE audit of our federal funds. The first 2 are under our umbrella of how we deal with federal funds, and the DAF one, it's allowability cost determination. We had the policy, we just needed to add a couple of paragraphs to align with updated language recommended. So they gave us that, and we used the School Boards Association as templates, and we have sent these drafts to the DOE, and we think we're in pretty good shape. The second one is the subrecipient. This was a policy, a gap. When we first developed our financial policies, this wasn't a requirement. They added this as a requirement. We found a template. We customized it to HOP, working with Michelle. And so we bring forward a DAF 11 as a subrecipient monitoring and managing. The third policy that they found on the audit was we had to add a paragraph to our substance-free workplace, requiring that if we do have an employee who has a violation of a drug crime, a felony with a drug crime, we have to notify federal agencies. That's now a requirement if we receive federal funds. So that's now in the policy. And our last one is we did not have a policy that prohibited the aiding and abetting of sexual abuse. And so we have now instilled that policy. So these are first readings. They'll come back for the next 2 meetings, and after the third reading, they get adopted. Seth and Andrea have worked just briefly through this, and we'll continue our policy work.
Thanks, Steve. Any questions on any of these items? Any of the policy items? The only one I had is on, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, so the only one I had is on the second one, the subrecipient monitoring and management. And this isn't at all my area of expertise, but when I read through the policy, it was pretty extensive. And so I guess my question is, does this policy add extra burdens on our administrative staff, or was it really just putting on paper practices that we've already been implementing? So it's not new work.
Yeah, when Michelle and I reviewed it, we did not think this was going to be substantive procedural changes. It was going to be more codifying what we do.
Okay, that's good.
And Chris had a meeting at 8 o'clock tonight, so he tagged me to do the quick graduation update when you're ready for that.
All right. Well, let me. That was nice of Chris to hang on for so long. Is there anything else on policy? Or are we ready to move forward? And so this will be first reading. We'll have these again on the agenda at our next meeting. All right. High school graduation update.
And Chris is here actually, so he must have postponed. So if you want to bump him over.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely do that.
I apologize. Well, everything's probably remote, so we probably did that one already or something.
There's Mr. Kelly.
Thanks, Chris, for hanging in there.
Chris, thanks for hanging in there and for joining us. Sorry you've been hanging on for so long.
No problem. It's on the deck, so it's nice weather.
Perfect.
Thanks for the opportunity to give you an update on our progress towards graduation. It's been a lot of work. I've been privileged to work with Trish Walton, who is our graduation coordinator this year. It's quite the task to take on, reinventing graduation, your first year as a graduation coordinator. So I have a great deal of admiration for the work that she's put in. Rebecca Gagnon is also involved, the class advisors, Holly Scher and Michelle Cotnoir. Dan Meserve is helping out tremendously with just the preparation of the field, and certainly Donna Bernardis with all the behind the scenes work that goes on in the office. So it's a small army, if you will, of our staff that are really working hard to put together a memorable event for the class of 2020. As you know, I brought and the next morning I sent that off to the state attorney, Chris Bond, with the DOE. And he doesn't approve the plan, but he just makes sure that the guidelines that I had put in place were being followed and adhered to what the state had put out for the end of the year guidelines as well. So he said that everything looked great, that we exceeded the guidelines with social distancing because we're doing those 12 by 12 squares, if you will, for our families. So we're on the way. Sound is in place. We have set up an arrangement with United Events out of Derry. They will be live streaming the event for us. So we will have that for those family members and friends who may not be able to attend that day. So we're in really good shape, I think, moving into next week. Donna Bernardis will continue to work with Avalon, which is the company out of Vermont that does all of our staging and seat arrangements. So that is moving forward. And then tomorrow I will be putting together another email communication to send out to the seniors and the families about the progress that we're making and how things are falling into place. I talked with Steve. Steve is going to set up a Zoom meeting for us for next Wednesday, I believe, for like around 6 o'clock. That information will be in that email communication tomorrow, where we'll invite families and our seniors to come and participate in a meeting where we can share all this information too. And if there are any questions, they have the opportunity to ask us those questions. We have about, last I looked, I think we have about 30 faculty that are attending as well. So that's a great representation for our school. And we're going to be utilizing them as well to help. They'll be helping to greet our families as they get out of their vehicles, and then escorting them down to the field, maintaining social distancing, along those things. And then they'll escort them out when the ceremony is over. And one nice thing that we decided to do, I was talking to Trish, and, not handing the students the diploma, just seemed impersonal. We had talked about leaving it on the chair and thinking about how could we make that a little bit more special. So what we're going to do, and the parents will find out tomorrow, I think Trish shared this with Project Graduation parents tonight, so I'm sure it will get out there pretty quickly, is that we're going to actually put the diploma on the parents' chair and ask them to present the diploma to their child when their name is called. And I just thought that that's just a nice way to include the parents in a ceremony. One more thing that we could do to make it unique, special for those students involved with their graduation this year. And so I'm really excited just to see that. I think that's what's really going to make this unique for us. And we've also met with Chief Pecora. We've covered our base there in regards to how do we make sure we can make this as secure as possible. And making that work on that day. And if anybody can pull strings with the weather, we would love a 74-degree day and cool sunshine. So that's really it in a nutshell. I'd be happy, Jim, Mr. O'Brien, to share with you that plan too, if you want to see that plan as I share that out tomorrow, just so the school board's aware of what that plan looks like. We look forward to hosting the school board that day as well. So we're looking forward to it, and things are moving forward. Every day I get a little bit more excited. The anxiety is kind of going away, and now it's growing to excitement. But there's been a lot of people that have really stepped up to make this happen. And having Project Graduation do that parade that Friday night before is just a great example of just how a community can come together to celebrate 73 well-deserved seniors on the night of graduation. In regards to the community piece, I think another thing that I'd like to mention is we knew that we had to wear masks. If you looked at the end of the year guidelines, masks were one of those things we had to make sure that we implemented, and that everybody would wear a mask. And those of you that know Michelle Allen, she's just a huge supporter of our schools, and her and Mel Thornley, who has a daughter who is also graduating, have really stepped up to the plate. So one of the things that I'm also excited about is that the masks are going to be, they'll be the school colors. On this one side, they'll say class of 2020. The other side, they'll have the hawk. They'll be, all handmade. So we'll have them for the parents as well. At first, they were just going to make them for the graduating class. So they were going to have about 80 made. And the next thing I know, they were pushing for 250. So really excited to see that. Just another example of how people are really stepping up for this class, and I just can't thank them enough. I saw pictures today. I'm really excited to just see those masks in person, and so we'll meet with the families next week, remind them of those guidelines, remind them that it's only 2 guests per graduate, and why we're doing that, and just really continue to ask them for just compliance for 90 minutes. And that's why I wanted to be cool, because I know they got to wear a mask. But in order to do this in person, there are certain things we just have to follow. But regardless, I'm really excited to see the kids together again one last time. And from what I hear from some of our faculty that have students who are graduating or are close to some of our seniors, I think their excitement is growing as well. So despite everything that we've all been having to live through and work through, I think this will really be a feather in our cap, so to speak. No pun intended, the School of the Hawks. But I really think this will be a defining moment for how well we can all work together. So, and if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer it.
Chris, that was great. It's great job to you and your team. It sounds like so much thought has gone into this, and the story about the masks is great. So well done. Thank you.
Well,
Questions for Chris? Or Mr. Kelly, I should be more formal. No, so I would, to your question, if you have, any plans or documents that you would want to share with the board, please do. I think, I know I would be happy to see those, not to critique or anything, but just to see what you guys are doing and be part of the process. But
right,
yeah.
that's what we offered. So if anyone on the board received any questions, you can refer back to that.
Yeah.
So I'll include that. I'll include your email, Jim, and then if you want to forward that out to the board, that'd be great. And
Yep.
Just email me over the weekend if any of the board members have just any clarifying questions. I'll make sure to get back to you by Monday.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and thanks for taking the time to brief us and to hang on here in our meetings. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks,
You too.
Chris.
Thanks, Chris. All right. So I'm gonna put the agenda back up, so I remember where we are. All right, so next item are some personnel items. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Chamberlain to walk us through these.
Sure. Make sure you can hear me. The first one is Maple Street School Special Education teacher Betsy Smith has submitted her letter of resignation. So the board will be asked to accept that tonight. She is off to a different part of the state as she takes her next journey. Tonight we begin the nominations for the ESY, which is extended school year. There was a submission. This is just the first wave. Just as Becky alluded to, we've got some Title I reading teachers paid out of the Title I grant and some lead teachers to guide us through. And at the 18th, we'll have more nominations regarding the extended school year program. I think we've already had all the discussion about the nomination slate, so I think that's okay. And there's 2 teachers that come forward in nominations. So we have currently right now 2 English positions open. This would be one of those positions for a high school position. That nomination packet was there. And then we have a special education teacher, Ashley Broussard-Nicholson, who's been doing fulfilled as a long-term sub, now would become the permanent special education teacher at HMHS. So those are 2 nominations tonight to fill those spots. Happy to answer any questions about the personnel section.
Any questions? None? So we're okay moving forward with the votes on those items? All right. Perfect. So we've come to our second public comment session of the meeting. This will be our last opportunity for public comment. And so for any attendee who wishes to provide public comment, if you move your cursor down to the bottom of your screen, there should be a button that you can click to raise your hand. If you do so, then I know that you have public comment, and we can allow you to unmute your line and ask your question or provide a comment. And so at this point, I would open it up, and if anybody has a comment that they'd like to provide. All right, Lori, hold on one second. I'm gonna move you over. Hi, Lori, you should be able to unmute your line, and I just ask you to state your name and your address and then provide your comment. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Jim. Lori Story-Manso, 603 Upper Straw Road. So I just had a question. I know that Seth had made a comment about recommendations from the community as to how to balance the budget, or how to reduce the budget. Is there a line-by-line budget available to the community?
So we have, I don't know about a line-by-line budget, like everything from like our pencils, but we have on the website, on our website in materials that are provided to the budget committee, there are the budget bulletin, which I think is like a 70 some odd page publication, as well as sort of our, I wouldn't call it the standard, but a larger budget spreadsheet that lists all the accounts and all the levels, and it goes back multiple years, so you can see the difference over time for those accounts. And then we have revenue sheets as well as expenditure sheets. And I assume what you mean by line item is sort of, you know, every expenditure that we track sort of on one spreadsheet.
I'm talking about a line item budget.
So we have all those other budget information available. If you're looking for additional information, I think you could reach out to us and we can track it down for you.
Okay, great. Where is it available?
So if you go onto the school district website, there is a tab for budget. And then under that tab would be the collection of all the budget information for fiscal year 21 and all the public presentations that have been made, both to the school board as well as to the budget committee, and then to the community as we've been sort of moving forward through this process. All that information is available on the website.
Terrific. Then I'll look forward to bringing some suggestions forward for you.
We really appreciate it. Thank you. So next up is Judy. So Judy, just bear with me one sec. Hi, Judy. You should be able to unmute your line. Thanks for joining. Judy, you're still muted. Oh, there you go. I think you're on mute.
Okay, yeah. I went to the muted microphone instead of the blue tab. So thanks for all the hard work and the active listening that you have employed since the vote from the town. I do have a question. I know in the town annual report, the audit, there's an audit, independent audit done that's reported on. Does the school board have the same thing with an audit that we could look at for expenditures versus revenue and all of that?
Yeah, thanks, Judy. Great question. And the answer is yes. So it was probably a month or two ago in which we met with the auditor and went through the audit report. And so, Steve, where is that? Is that located on the website, the audit report that we just went through?
I think it's in the town report too, isn't it, Michelle, or some of it?
Pieces are in the town report as well as on the district website. I believe it's underneath the business area. There's prior years audit reports as well as the 2018-19.
2018-19, okay, all right. And again, I know I've said this before, but I just want to reiterate that you can count on the town of Hopkinton to support and provide services and volunteerism going forward. I know that there is a nonprofit organization, but I personally have been heavily involved for many years in schools and supportive schools in Washington State, and I know that it's possible to mobilize and fill in some of those gaps through volunteerism and partnering with other local agencies and even large businesses to help step up. And I think that you need to know that you can count on all of us to bring those suggestions forward, as well as any budget decrease suggestions or that we may have as well.
Great. Thank you, Judy. Can I just ask you to state your name, your full name, and your address? I'm sorry, I should have reminded you at the beginning.
Judy Case, 1030 Briar Hill Road.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. I don't see any other hands. Oh, I do see another hand. My apologies. Candy, hold on one moment. Hi, Candy. You should be able to unmute your line. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Candy Garvin, 515 Boundtree Road. It's nice to see everybody's face. First, I'd like to thank everybody who worked so hard for that voting. It was a fairly well-oiled machine, we'll say it that way. Thanks for Dulcie and Tom, all the volunteers. It was good. It was a good process. And hopefully we could, if we have to, we could do it that way again, but that's up to powers beyond me. I do have a little comment about having the community, how am I going to say this? The board needs to listen to the community, and the community needs to understand what the board needs and wants to provide for the school district. Yes, but I think the votes did show you what the community needed, and that was to cut the budget. And yes, you're absolutely right. There are going to be some really hard cuts. As far as getting suggestions from us, I think the only way we really could truly do that and do it in a fair way is to look at a line-by-line budget. You look at it, I would say, you look at all your educational needs, and that includes your instructional assistants, because you'll have some special ed kids who have one-on-ones, or you share them with the different classrooms. They're needed. It's not an emotional thing. They are needed to provide a good education and a smoother transition for education for those kids who need it. But there are some things in the budget that might not be needed. And this is where I will probably be killed. And I'm okay with that. Thanks, Andrea, for smiling. I think if you look at the number of students who are in certain programs, whether it be educational or athletics or buses, you know, we had the same thing. We have a lot of parents who bring their children to school instead of the buses. That might be something to look at. I know one by one, these things look small, but if you have 20 people on a certain team and it's only 20, and you're paying for a coach, you're paying for you know, referees and things like that, and transportation, that might be something you want to think about. An educational assistant to help with the learning process, that's what our district needs, then maybe that needs to be more important than some other things. Again, I know this has been brought up in many town meetings before, and people just start tearing their hair out. I really do trust yes, Norm, that's what happened. I trust that the people who are making these decisions are making the best decisions for the education of our children. I trust you. Please know that we just voted that way, we, the community, because of the uncertainty of the times. It's not short-sighted. We have to think about that. And I thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Steve, for all the work that you've done, and Michelle and the board. I really thank you. But look at things that are non-education things. And I thank you again. Take care.
I was muted. Thank you, Candy, for joining us and for your comments. So Catherine, hold on one moment, Catherine. All right, hi, Catherine. Thanks for joining us. You should be able to unmute your line and just let us know your name and where you reside. Thanks.
Hi, Catherine Matteo, 108 Park Ave. I agree with everything Candy just said, wholeheartedly, everything. I have total confidence in you guys, and I do agree that, you know, balancing maybe the extracurricular activities versus educational needs is important. I know I am like a broken record with this, but I just want to say it again. And you're probably smiling because you know what I'm going to say, but the elevator repair, if there's any way to get that out of the operating budget and into that facility bond, that's like $92,400. I know I'm a broken record on it, but I'm going to keep saying it. I would love to see that out of the operating budget to free up that money and into the facility repair. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the comments. And don't apologize for being a squeaky wheel. We appreciate your comments.
Okay.
Any other attendees? I don't see any other hands up. So I'll give it one more minute. If anybody would like to provide public comment, now's the time. All right, so I don't see any, so I am going to close public comment. Thank you all for joining us. We can go back to the agenda and go to action items. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to reduce your smiling faces so I can see my screen. All right, so is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to vote in support of the resolution stated in the certificate of vote regarding the authorization of bonds and approval of loan agreement with the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Perfect. And all that information was, just so our audience knows, all that information was provided in the board packet, these documents that we're referencing. So there's been a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. Norm?
Norm Poopel is a yes.
Rob?
Rob Nato is a yes.
Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Seth?
Seth A. Frame, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is a yes. All right, is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to authorize the chair of the Hopkinton School Board to sign the loan agreement dated July 14th, 2020 for the purpose of obtaining $5 million loan from the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank?
So moved.
Sorry.
I heard Rob moved it and Norm seconded.
Sure.
Any discussion? All right, seeing none. Norm?
Norm Poopel is a yes.
Rob?
Rob Nato is a yes.
Seth?
Seth A. Frame, yes.
Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is a yes. Congratulations. This is a big step forward on the building and facility project. So again, great work to the building project team for moving this forward. All right. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve the superintendent's recommendation to accept Maple Street School Special Educator Betsy Smith's letter of resignation effective June 30th, 2020?
So moved.
Rob moved. Is that a second?
I'll second.
Perfect. Any discussion?
Yes, my wife will dearly miss you, Betsy. I hope you enjoy the seacoast.
Any other discussion? All right, seeing none. Rob?
Rob Nato's a yes.
Norm?
Norm Poopel is a yes.
Seth?
Seth A. Frame, yes.
And Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Jim O'Brien is a yes. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve the superintendent nomination of the first stage of the extended school year program for faculty and staff as presented?
I make that motion.
I'll second.
Perfect. Any discussion? Seeing none. Seth?
Seth A. Frame, yes.
Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm?
Norm Poopel, yes.
Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is a yes. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve the superintendent's nomination of Lauren Gerhard, English teacher, Hopkinton High School, a 1.0 FTE, pending final approval of the superintendents of schools?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none. Norm?
Norm Poopel, yes.
Seth?
Seth A. Frame, yes.
Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is a yes. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve the superintendent's nomination of Ashley Brizard Nicholson, HMHS Special Education Teacher, 1.0 FTE, effective July 1st, 2020?
So moved. Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm,
Norm Gupel, yes.
Rob,
Rob Nato, yes.
Seth,
Seth A. Frame, yes.
and Jim O'Brien is a yes. So that concludes our action items for this meeting. We have 2 items for non-public discussion. And so one item is A for personnel. And then we'll have a second item, and I don't know what the letter is, but it's under the 91A, it's for negotiations. And so I'd ask if there's a motion for the board to go into non-public session for the discussion of those matters per RSA 91A 3 Roman 2. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. So it's a roll call vote. Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Seth?
Seth A. Frame, yes.
Norm?
Norm Gupel, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is a yes. So what we'll do for non-public is the same thing that we did previously. I will send you guys to your SAU email address a link for non-public, and if we go in at 8:35, that would probably be a good time to commence. Give us a few minutes. And I'll say for the public that there is not going to be any, there won't be any additional action items taken by the board other than to come out of non-public and to seal the minutes. And so with that, we will conclude this meeting, and for the board, look out for an email in a minute or two for the non-public session. Thank you all.